Skinner, an old friend of Monday Night Live. David's a consummate reader, a leadership coach, and like many of us, is curious to continue to learn. Last time David was with us, he talked about connecting for nature, connecting with nature for resilience, and he now works with a dose of nature, a charity which helps people, and it's actually prescribed by doctors because it's just great to get out in the green. But we're not going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about David's discoveries by the books of Naoki Higashida. And when David first talked about this, I didn't know who he was talking about, but particularly his book called Fall Down Seven Times and Get Up Eight. Welcome, David. Thanks for joining Monday Night Live. And just tell us a little bit about A Dose of Nature and how it helps people before we get on to the book.
Um, it's a charity that local to our area GPs will prescribe people to come to instead of perhaps precautionary of drugs or maybe to alongside them, and it effectively provides people with the opportunity to engage with nature and experience well-being benefits which have clinical significance. So it's going quite well and seems to be quite a successful operation at the moment.
Great. And at this time of year, which I've been writing about in my newsletter, it seems particularly pertinent when perhaps, in fact, it's Blue Monday today, isn't it? I wasn't even going to mention that because I wrote about it this morning, but that's just a marketing spin, I understand. But let's go and talk about Fall Down Seven Times and Get Up Eight. What was the fascination for you with this book?
Well, I find it particularly striking because it takes the reader into a world which is somehow familiar to us. We recognize it, but we're seeing it through the eyes of somebody who has a completely and utterly different perspective to us. So the book takes us into his world, how he engages with it, the challenges it gives him, and how he deals with them. And that's because he has severe nonverbal autism, which we can go into. But he,
Remind us what severe non-verbal autism is, because I haven't got a clue.
um, well, I'm no expert, so I have no training or inside knowledge on this. But this is really just what you get from the book, but what his experience of it is, and I can't speak for anyone else at all. Is free flowing conversation is impossible for him. He might be able to produce two, three word sentences. They may relate to what he's thinking, or they may not. And he writes, or initially he was writing by tracing the Japanese letters on the hand of a helper who then transcribed it for him, letter by letter. He now uses an alphabet grid, which makes life a little bit easier. But you can imagine that's a very slow and difficult process. It's made more difficult by the fact that he gets easily distracted. So he can get up in the middle of writing a sentence and walk around the window and do all sorts of other things. So he could take either 60 seconds to write one line of text or 20 minutes. And what comes across from his book that he has meltdowns, he has obsessive behavior, which he says is as impossible to stop as it is to stop yourself vomiting. He has anxiety, unfamiliar situations, and has to navigate all this. And what he does is he takes you inside that world, and you understand the individual in a way that you wouldn't just by looking at him.
And that book on the left there of the screen, he wrote when he was 13. Is that right?
Yes, that's the first book he wrote, which is really a set of one-page observations explaining why he does what he does. And it takes you into a different world again. I mean, for example, he talks about the best way of getting him to eat strange foods, which you'd normally reject. And he says, well, if you just leave them on the edge of the plate, when I feel like exploring, one day I might try one. But if I don't feel like exploring, I won't. Which is really probably like most children. Um, but don't try and make him eat things if he doesn't want to. So
Mm.
that sort of communication, which he couldn't articulate to anybody, ex begins to explain his behavior. Um, and so what I found about Fall Down Seven Times, Get Up Eight was that the really sharp difference in perspective of the world from him compared to how I see it made me think about the assumptions I make about other people, um, and sort of shakes me into thinking about how we all navigate our lives.
And we all make assumptions about other people, don't we,
Yeah,
actually? First impressions, which is always pretty dangerous.
yeah.
Yeah. But what actually drew you to the book in the first place? Because it's a bit unusual.
Yes, I can't remember, but it was a reference from another book, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting, so I'll read that. I can't remember the book it came from, I'm afraid. Um,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I mean, I think what one of the things that really came across for me is, in one respect, how different we are from him, but in other respects, how absolutely similar we are, and that sort of that we can draw that out as we talk through it.
Mm.
Um, so it was a
So I
uh,
guess the next question is, what were the key takeaways from the book?
yes. Well, it's that was quite a hard thing to try and condense, but I think there's probably four main things, and you've got them on the slide there. Um, and I'll go into each one separately, but I'll just go through all four just as an overview. How easy it is to confuse physical impairment with cognitive impairment, two very different things. How easy it is for us to impose our view of the world on the behavior of others, rather than trying to understand what needs to be in place for their behavior to make sense. And we can talk a bit more about that. The value of failure he talks about, and in a way, fall down seven times, get up eight, is trying to embody that. And the peril of being too comfortable. And he talks about how he doesn't want to sit within his comfort zone because he'll never grow. And he also talks about the value of accepting yourself, um, and how that has been important in his development. So those were the sort of four key areas that I thought might be useful to touch on.
No, that's great. Talking about growth, I was listening to Stephen Bartlett's latest podcast where he interviews Tony Robbins, and I've been a fan of Tony Robbins, but find him quite a strange man. But he does come up with some very interesting things, and he was talking about people without growth really are going to fade away and die. We're all interested in growth, aren't we? And that's what we're doing here today, sharing. So do you want to go to the first one now?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Not surprisingly, on the surface, he does a lot of things that seem weird to us. Makes noises, gets obsessed with things, has meltdowns, blurts things out, speaks in abbreviated sentences at best. But what it comes across and we might, those are all effectively results of his physical condition. Um, they don't relate to the person inside, who comes across as extremely thoughtful, very self-aware, emotional, determined to achieve things, who gets anxious about things just as we do, and who wants to succeed just as we do, wants to live a life where he's accepted and independent and able to manage his future. And what you comes across is there really is an inner logic to the things he does, if only we could work it out. Um, and he says, imagine a world where you never know you're saying the wrong thing until you hear yourself say it, which is quite hard to get your head around. But he gives an example where he has helpers who take him out and bring him back home again. And he wants to thank a helper for taking him out, bring him home safely. And what he does is he looks at the helper and says, "Have a nice day." Um, and he explains how he got from wanting to thank them to saying, "Have a nice day." So it's sort of he has eight steps. He wanted to say thank you. As soon as he tried to find the words, his mind went blank. And as a result, he had no idea what he needed to do next. He was completely at a loss. So he looked down and saw the helper's shoes in the doorway. And that reminded him of seeing his father's shoes there earlier in the day when he left for work. And that made a scene flash up of his father saying, "Have a nice day" to him. And then he remembered he needed to say something. So he blurted out, "Have a nice day." Um, there's a logic to that, but if we just look at it in isolation, here's somebody saying the wrong thing. And it's easy to assume there's some sort of cognitive issue going on there, whereas really it's just a reflection of what his particular condition. Um, and time and again, you as you read through the book, you realize that when you understand the process and what's going on in his mind, the behaviors he gives make sense. Um, and so that's that sort of leads into the second point, I suppose. Um,
I was just going to ask you
yeah.
the, I guess 50 years ago, um, somebody like him would have either had to have been at a very special school or would have been the village idiot, would he? I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but he may well have been that.
Well, I mean, the inability to communicate effectively, I think, does trigger a lot of preconceptions about what's going on in
Mm,
somebody's mind, and I think
yeah.
that's quite a lot of it. And he doesn't behave the way we would predict. So
No.
we go through life predicting what's going to happen the next, but then he does something different, which again is challenging for us.
Thank goodness we've moved on from where we used to be. Well, not so many years ago.
Yeah.
This is point two, isn't it?
Yes. Yep. How easy we impose our world view of the world on the behavior of others. And a couple of little things the stories came out in my mind there. And he talks about how he loves doing jigsaws. Fair enough, lots of people do. But he pays attention to the pieces rather than the picture. And slotting the pieces together is the fun bit of doing the jigsaw, even to the extent that when he's completed the puzzle, he turns it over so that he can observe and admire the beauty of the way the pieces slot together. Um, um, all the curved lines of the pieces. Um, but completing the puzzle actually defeats the point. He doesn't want to complete the puzzle because then the fun bit's over, slotting the pieces together. So what you see is somebody who doesn't care about the picture, who doesn't go from the outside in, but just wants to slot bits together, um, and turns it upside down. So there's a behavior that would be odd to us. And if we were trying to help him do a jigsaw, probably what I would do would be to help him understand the picture and look for the different bits of the picture as you would with your own child, and admire the picture at the end when it's done. Um, but that wouldn't help him do a jigsaw because that's not how he views the world.
I'm not sure. You mentioned the word child. My wife's doing a 2,000 piece jigsaw that she was bought for Christmas by her son. So I'm not sure. Good job she's not listening to this. But I was just thinking, putting the pieces together without the picture sounds incredibly hard to me.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, now the way he describes it, I think the picture was there. I mean, because he talks about turning it upside down, but the point is that the fun part is the slotting the pieces together. Now that sounds like a trivial example, but if you think in our lives, the value of having diverse perspectives on the same problem, there's an example that there's probably an awful lot of value in somebody who likes to see how the different components of a piece of a problem slot together, and aren't really interested in the big picture.
Mm,
And if you were building a team, you'd actually want somebody like that, who takes a completely different perspective on the problem to the one you do.
mm.
Um, he sort of another example is he talks about biting clothes, and something he does periodically is bite his clothes as hard as he possibly can. Uh, Very bizarre behavior. Don't understand it, but he explains it. Um, he gets fixations, sort of obsessions with things. He tells a story about how whenever he went into a station, he had to find a particular soft toy in the shop. Didn't need to buy it, just needed to know it was there. And if he couldn't do that, then he would get really upset and have a meltdown. And he's aware of this, and he's aware of how disturbing it is for everybody, and he doesn't want to do it. And so he's determined to not follow his fixation whilst fighting the demands of that fixation. And he says that makes him erupt in anger. He wants to take control of the situation, but he can't. And the anger is directed at his brain because it's his brain that's making him do these fixations. So he punches his head. because that's where his brain is, and he's so out of control. Um, and he says he feels the pressure building up inside him like an overinflated balloon. By biting his sleeve as hard as he can, for him, it releases that pressure. And he says, I know it's not cool to bite your clothes, but at the moment, that's the only way I can deal with it. And my goal is to control my meltdowns without actually having to bite my clothes.
Okay.
When you have that perspective explained from this non-verbal person as to what's actually going on, it begins to make sense. And he guides people, helpers, of saying, "Well, if you see me doing this, here's the best way of dealing with me." But there's another example of how imposing our view of what's reasonable behavior and understanding that behavior is completely inappropriate for what's actually going on for him. Um, and you could expand that to our own lives. Look at international relations. What is it makes one country behave the way they do? If you look at America and Russia, people observe that Trump's treatment of Putin is anomalous in their worldview. So rather than berating either side, you might take a different view and say, well, what circumstances are there that make that behavior make sense? And that could take you down a lot of different view angles of understanding or hypothesis as to what might be going on. But it's very different from just fighting against what you think is going on that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, we discussed that, didn't we, when we were having a coffee this morning? And I'm not sure any of that makes sense to me, but there we
Well,
are.
if you could only work out the dynamics or get to understand the dynamics, there has to be a basis upon which it does make sense.
There's certainly a lot of speculation about it at the moment, isn't there?
Yes. Um, we can maybe go on to the next point.
Sure.
Um, I mean, the whole title of the book is Fall Down Seven Times, Get Up Eight, which is really about the value of failure. And he talks about success, and he says, well, it isn't an invigorating experience like he says taking in the view from the summit of a tall mountain. He says it's more like walking on a tightrope barefoot in a circus tent. And when you reach the platform the other end, you get your applause, but the big drop down can still happen at any moment. Um, and it's only people who think of getting to the platform as an end in itself that sees success as a nice, shiny state, which really made me think of fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. Because the fixed mindset gets to the end and they've got their nice, shiny state, but they've got nowhere to go, and they're undoubtedly going to have a drop at some point. Um, and he says some people obsess over how not to fail. Um, and he says it's okay to be afraid of failure, but we need to squeeze every drop of courage and get back up when we do fail. And success can be thought of as a product of countless failures, something that comes into view after taking many small steps up a steep slope. Um, and if he can turn the memory of failing into a memory of victory over adversity, he can overcome any failure. Um, and so that, for him, that means resolving to increase the range of things he can do without assistance. But there's a good example of not confusing physical impairment with cognitive impairment, because that's really quite um, thoughtful ideas that can apply to us all. Um,
Yeah,
which
you've reminded me of the Edison quote. I found a thousand ways of not in inventing the light bulb, but it's interesting. Someone with his impairments thinks exactly the same.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to tell the Indian restaurant story in a
Oh
minute.
yes, yes, I
Have I
can do.
have I
Yeah.
jumped a bit ahead? But that's his big one of his biggest challenges at the moment, isn't it?
Well, I don't know whether it's what it is at the moment, but he talked about how his father took him to a new Indian restaurant and asked him if he liked the food. Um, and he said, quite honestly, I wasn't thinking about the food because it was a new restaurant that I wasn't used to, and that stressed me out. Um, and what stressed him out is the knowledge that he finds new situations stressful, and that can cause a meltdown, which would be distressing for all the other people in the restaurant. So he was worried he was going to have a meltdown and cause a big scene. And he said, the restaurants I like going to are the ones which are all the same. They're familiar. The setup is all the same, and I'm less stressed out by it. And then I know I'm less likely to have a meltdown. Then I'm less stressed, so it's a bit of a feedback loop, which is fair enough. Understand that. But he then said, going to a restaurant is a new challenge, and I'm determined to get to the position where I can do that. So rather than having a nice, comfortable time going to the restaurants that are familiar and unstressful, he wanted to put himself outside of his comfort zone in order to grow and develop, which is a theme right the way through the book. That he isn't satisfied with being where he is, and it might take him years to do it, but he wants to gradually build his repertoire to going into places um, that currently make him uneasy. Um, and that sort of fits in with the perils of comfort. If he lives a comfortable life, accepting what he can't do now, uh, he's never going to grow.
Mm.
And the restaurant is a very good example of that.
And you talked about Carol Dweck's work about growth mindset and a fixed
Yeah.
mindset. I think there's going to be a lot of people shocked that have got fixed mindsets with AI coming in, and I wonder how AI will help someone like him. I'm sure it'll help him in a really good, really big way.
Must be very positive, I suppose. Yeah.
So, do we need to move on to the
Yeah.
last
If we
point?
go ahead on to the next one, the accepting yourself. He talks about the importance of accepting yourself. And he said until he was 13, he didn't really want to be seen by strangers. He'd hide his head under a blanket. Um, and he said that was really because he didn't accept himself for who and what he was, in hindsight. And he said it was only he only reached a place where he could be seen when he was able to accept his disability. Um, and being around strangers still makes him uneasy, and he might get out of control. But he said, if I spend all my life avoiding crowds for fear of what might happen, I'll never be able to go anywhere. So he doesn't give up, and he continues to stretch himself. And that point about accepting where he is now, and being okay with it is applicable to all of us. We get nervous about seeing ourselves on video. Well, if that's partly because we don't really like the look of ourselves as we appear on video, or how we sound, or we might look a bit silly and we're uncomfortable with it. The way to get comfortable with it is by accepting yourself, that is the way you are and who you are. So those points, time and again, you can see the parallels between what he says and our lives. So it isn't a book about somebody who's experiencing a life of a severe nonverbal autistic person. It's a book about lessons in life that we can take for ourselves. Um, Two final thoughts, which sort of came out that I picked out of the book. I mean, these are quotes from the book. Tomorrow might be indistinguishable from yesterday, but on the far side of tomorrow, our whole future is waiting, and it's our present selves who dream that future into being, which I think is really about continually growing and recognizing that it's our vision of the future ahead of us, that generates our own growth. And the final quote was one he came up with that I picked out, which he talked about people with autism, but I'm changing it slightly to say it's just about people. People might talk and behave in peculiar ways, but that shouldn't relegate them to a lesser branch of humanity. Please give them the benefit of the doubt and act on the assumption that they're good people. If you suspect they're a lost cause, they pick up on that. The value of a person shouldn't be decided upon by the judgments of other people. Kindness brings out the best in us all. So I thought that was quite a, a core learning that we should all take on board. Yeah.
We certainly should. And David, thank you so much for doing the preparation for this presentation. We really appreciate that coming back and sharing with us on Monday Night Live. And before I open it to questions, I will ask members of Monday Night Live to give you a vote of thanks in the normal Monday Night Live way. And People on here all appreciate how much hard work goes into doing a presentation like this. You have to get yourself outside your comfort zone, which we've been talking about, which gives us growth, doesn't it? So thanks for joining us. And one last question for you, and you don't even know I'm going to ask you that. What's your definition of success?
There's a good question. My definition of success. Um,
I think you're doing it, by the way. I think you're very successful at what you're doing in your contribution back to
I, s-
society. But
I suppose it depends what you're trying to achieve. So you've got to know what your goals are to start with. Um, be flexible in them. But I suppose showing progress and development, wherever in whatever direction you're going to be successful. So it's not absolute, it's relative.
fantastic. Sorry about that one. I caught you out there. Never
Yeah,
mind.
that's fine.
I'm sure you'll get me back or somebody else will. David Skinner, thanks for joining Monday Night Live. I really appreciate that. And if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on the Negotiators podcast, would you please like it and will you share it with your friends? Thanks for joining us. See you next week.
Thank you.